Have you ever met someone who stayed silent through chaos? Who absorbed pain that wasn't theirs, who forgave things that were never apologized for, who loved people that never really knew how to love them back? That is the empath, the rare soul that feels everything more deeply than most people ever will. They walk through life with open hearts and open wounds, sensing every shift in the atmosphere, every tremor in another person's voice. They don't just hear pain, they feel it, and somewhere inside, they believe it's their duty to heal it. Empaths are the light bearers of this world, but that light comes at a cost. Their compassion is both their greatest gift and their greatest vulnerability. Because where there is light, the shadows always gather. And that's where the narcissist enters. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." When an empath meets a narcissist, it's not a coincidence, it's chemistry. It's an energetic collision between one who gives endlessly and one who takes without end. The empath, guided by their instinct to heal, sees the narcissist's charm as pain in disguise. They think, if I just love them right, they'll change. But what they don't realize is that the narcissist doesn't seek healing, they seek control. They crave admiration, not connection. And the empath, with their pure intentions, becomes the perfect mirror for that hunger. At first, it feels magnetic. The narcissist seems fascinated by the empath's depth, and the empath feels seen, chosen, finally understood. But this is not love. It's a transaction of power. A dance where one feeds on validation, and the other confuses sacrifice with strength. It's a silent contract written in invisible ink. The empath gives, and the narcissist takes. The empath forgives, and the narcissist repeats. And for a while, the empath tells themselves it's worth it, that this person just needs more time, more love, more understanding. But there comes a day, a quiet, unremarkable day, when something inside the empath snaps. It's not a violent breaking. It's a stillness. The kind of silence that comes when the illusion finally collapses. When the empath sees not a wounded soul, but a manipulative one. Not a project to be healed, but a parasite to be released. Jung believed that the greatest danger to the psyche is identification, when we lose ourselves by merging with another's shadow. That's what happens to the empath. They begin to mistake the narcissist's wounds for their own. They take responsibility for emotions that were never theirs to carry. They shrink, they silence their needs, and call it love. But true love cannot exist where one person is drained and the other is fed. And so, eventually, the empath wakes up. When they do, the transformation is not gentle, it's absolute. The very energy the narcissist once controlled becomes unreachable. The supply of validation, empathy, and attention, gone. The empath's silence becomes their revolution. Their distance becomes their declaration of power. And the narcissist, for the first time, confronts what they fear most. A mirror that no longer reflects them. The fed-up empath is not cruel. They don't scream, they don't seek revenge. They simply stop engaging, and that absence is louder than any retaliation could ever be. Because for the narcissist, control is oxygen. And the empath, by walking away, cuts off the air. Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." For the empath, that pain was the realization that their love could not fix someone who didn't want to heal. For the narcissist, the pain is the loss of someone they believed they owned. This is not the empath's downfall, it's their ascension. It's the moment their empathy stops being submission and becomes strength. It's the awakening of a soul that no longer bleeds for the undeserving. And that awakening, quiet, steady, unstoppable, is the most dangerous thing a narcissist will ever face. Because once the empath has seen the truth, they will never play small again. The breaking point, when compassion turns into clarity. Every empath begins as light, warm, forgiving, endlessly giving. They see potential where others see ruin. They hold space for chaos and call it love. And for a while, this feels noble. It feels like purpose. But Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And for many empaths, the unconscious takes the form of their own suffering disguised as compassion. They confuse healing with saving. They mistake understanding for endurance. It begins with small sacrifices, silencing their needs to keep the peace, dimming their emotions to avoid being too much, excusing cruelty as pain. The empath tells themselves they're wounded. I can help. But what they're really saying is, I can survive their storm if it means they won't abandon me. Because deep down, the empath's compassion is not weakness, it is love unrefined by boundaries. And Jung knew that unrefined love is the breeding ground of shadow, the place where one's desire to save others conceals a silent plea to be seen themselves. So the story unfolds the same way it always does. The narcissist feeds on the empath's warmth, drawing energy from their understanding, admiration, and forgiveness. The empath keeps giving, believing that if they just love a little harder, things will change. But there comes a moment, slow, quiet, devastating, when the mirror breaks. The empath sees, truly sees, what stands before them, not a wounded soul needing light, but a predator thriving on reflection. The realization is not anger. It's not even sadness. It's stillness. It's the moment compassion turns into clarity. This is the psychological rupture Jung spoke of, the confrontation with the shadow, not in another, but in oneself. The empath realizes, my love has become my prison. And suddenly, everything changes. The empath stops explaining, stops defending, stops softening every blow. The silence that follows terrifies the narcissist, because silence, from someone who used to absorb everything, means awareness. The spell is broken. In Jungian terms, the empath has integrated part of their shadow, the side that knows anger, that knows self-worth, that refuses to bleed for someone else's hunger. And with this integration comes power. The empath no longer shines to be seen, they illuminate from within. It's a paradox Jung would have admired. Only when the empath stops trying to heal others do they begin to heal themselves. Only when they stop chasing light in others do they find their own. And yet, this awakening doesn't come with pride, it comes with grief. Because the empath must mourn their old self, the healer, the forgiver, the one who always stayed. They must face the truth that not everyone who cries deserves compassion, and not every heart that breaks can be repaired by love. But from this grief is born something far more powerful, discernment. The empath begins to see energy like truth. Who drains it, who honors it, who mirrors it back. They no longer confuse chaos with depth or pain with passion. They begin to realize that peace is not found in fixing others. It is found in refusing to be broken with them. And that is the breaking point, not a fall, but a rising. The day the empath stops pouring and starts preserving. The day they realize that love without self-respect is not love at all. In Jung's words, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And at that moment, when the empath chooses themselves, the lifetime finally begins. The narcissists panic, losing control of their supply. When the empath withdraws, not in anger, not in revenge, but in silence, something fractures in the narcissist's world. The supply line that once fed their fragile ego suddenly dries up. The constant validation, the emotional buffet of admiration, pity, and attention, gone. For the narcissist, this silence is not emptiness. It's annihilation. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And this is precisely what the narcissist now faces, the echo of their own hollowness. You see, the narcissist doesn't fear being disliked. They fear being unseen. Their entire persona, every charm, every manipulation, every false confession, is designed to keep their reflection alive in someone else's eyes. Without that reflection, they cease to exist in their own mind. That's why the empath's withdrawal feels like death to them. It's not about love lost, it's about losing their mirror. And so begins what Jung might have called the panic of the shadow. At first, they'll reach for the old tricks. Love bombing, tears, guilt, half-hearted apologies that sound like redemption. They'll promise change, promise peace, promise a future. But none of it comes from love, it comes from desperation. Because underneath the mask, the narcissist is drowning in the one thing they've spent their entire life avoiding: self-confrontation. Jung wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. For the narcissist, this is unthinkable. Their entire identity is built on rejection, of shame, of vulnerability, of imperfection. When the empath walks away, the narcissist loses not just control, but protection. The empath's light used to keep their shadow at bay. Now, without it, they must face the darkness alone. That's when the dirty tricks begin. They may start a smear campaign, twist stories, cast doubt, poison your image to others. They may feign victimhood, crying out to anyone who will listen about your coldness, your change, your betrayal. Because if they can't control your love, they'll control your reputation. They'll divide mutual friends, weaponize memories, and rewrite history, because in their world, truth bends to the preservation of ego. But even this strategy begins to fail when the empath refuses to engage. You see, narcissists thrive on reaction. Positive or negative, it doesn't matter. What matters is energy, attention, the confirmation that they still matter to you. But the empath, once awakened, no longer plays. They learn that silence is not weakness, it's power. They learn that peace is not found in proving innocence, but in knowing it. And this indifference, this calm, measured, grounded indifference, is the narcissist's greatest fear. Because it reflects something back they cannot bear: their own insignificance. Their whole illusion depended on being the center of someone's world. When the empath no longer orbits them, the narcissist feels reality collapse. It's as if the sun has stopped shining, because they never realized the warmth came from someone else's fire. Psychologically, this is when the narcissist begins to spiral. Some lash out with rage, cruel words, threats, or sudden attempts to sabotage your peace. Others retreat into self-pity, crafting a tragic story to lure back sympathy. But no matter the form, it all stems from one wound: they have lost control. And control, to the narcissist, is oxygen. Keeps the mask intact. It prevents the truth, that deep, gnawing sense of emptiness, from rising to the surface. Jung described this as possession by the shadow. When one refuses to acknowledge their darkness, it begins to rule them. That's what you're witnessing, not power but possession. Their attacks, their theatrics, their chaos, these are not signs of dominance. They are signs of collapse. Meanwhile, the empath watches in quiet clarity. No longer emotionally hooked, they begin to see the pattern for what it is: a tragic performance, not a personal failure. They understand that what once felt like love was dependency, that what once looked like devotion was control. And with that understanding comes freedom, a freedom so profound it terrifies the one who lost them. For the narcissist, this freedom is an existential threat. It proves that their power was never real, it was borrowed. And once the empath reclaims it, the illusion shatters. In that moment, the narcissist faces the one truth they can't manipulate: that they never owned the empath. They only fed on what the empath freely gave. And now, that source is gone. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When the empath walks away, they have made the darkness conscious, both theirs and the narcissist's. They see what others don't. They name what others fear. And that act alone, the courage to see clearly, is what makes the narcissist panic. Because clarity is something they cannot control, and truth is something they cannot survive. The rise of the shadow empath. When the empath finally detaches, the world around them doesn't simply change, they do. Their silence is no longer surrender, it is sacred reconstruction. For the first time in years, maybe decades, their energy begins to return home. The hands that once reached to soothe others now tremble with a new realization: I don't have to save anyone to be worthy of peace. Carl Jung wrote, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." And this is what happens when the empath begins to rise, not by escaping the darkness, but by descending into it and coming back with understanding. For so long they feared their own anger, their own boundaries, their own desire to say no. They believed kindness meant self-erasure, and patience meant enduring disrespect. But the shadow, the repressed, rejected, silenced side, was always there, waiting. It whispered, "You are not only light. You are everything you've hidden to stay loved." At first, meeting this shadow feels wrong. The empath feels guilt for standing up for themselves. They feel shame for prioritizing rest, suspicion when they no longer feel empathy for cruelty. But slowly, they begin to understand. This isn't hardness. This is balance. The shadow empath is not cruel. They are conscious. They have learned that compassion without discernment is self-destruction. They have realized that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, and understanding doesn't mean tolerance. This is the turning point Jung called individuation, the integration of light and dark into a whole, authentic self. It's the moment the empath ceases to live in polarity, no longer savior or victim, but sovereign. They stop trying to rescue others from pain, and start rescuing themselves from patterns. And that shift, that quiet, inner revolution, makes them more powerful than the narcissist ever imagined. Because now, their empathy has evolved. It is no longer blind, reactive, or self-sacrificial. It is precise, intuitive, grounded in strength. They can see manipulation without absorbing it. They can witness pain without drowning in it. They can love deeply without losing themselves in the process. This is the birth of emotional alchemy. Jung would say they have turned lead into gold, the lead of codependency into the gold of awareness. They have found that empathy is not about carrying others' burdens. It is about holding space without surrendering your soul. And in this transformation, a subtle but powerful energy begins to radiate from them, calm, contained, sovereign. They no longer need to prove their goodness. They no longer need to justify their boundaries. Their peace becomes their statement. Their silence becomes their defense. And this unnerves those who once fed on their light. Because the empath is no longer available for extraction. They are no longer an endless well. They are an ocean with tides, choosing when to flow and when to retreat. The shadow empath doesn't hate the narcissist. They no longer even feel anger. They see the narcissist as a lesson, a reflection of their own unhealed parts, their own longing to be seen. But they no longer confuse reflection with connection. That's the final piece of the awakening, realizing that not every connection is meant to be completed. Some are meant to reveal. Some are meant to break. Some are meant to burn everything false so only truth remains. And when that happens, the empath becomes something rare. Not the fragile healer, but the grounded guide. Not the overgiver, but the observer. Not the one who bends to keep peace, but the one who stands firm in it. They start living life with a new kind of clarity, choosing relationships that feel like alignment, not survival, speaking words that come from wholeness, not fear, and walking through the world with a quiet confidence that others can feel but not quite name. This is what Jung called the emergence of the self, the moment the ego bows to something greater, deeper, truer within. It's no longer about being nice or understanding. It's about being authentic, even if that authenticity intimidates those who thrive in illusion. And the narcissist, sensing this change, can no longer reach them. Their hooks, their guilt, their projections, all fall flat. Because the empath's energy has shifted from reactive to reflective, from vulnerable to visionary. They have seen through the illusion, and once you see through, you can never unsee. The spell is broken. The empath no longer orbits around others' wounds. They move from the center of their own healing. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." And that is what defines the shadow empath. The courage to become something beyond the pain. The choice to turn survival into wisdom. The choice to rise, not in spite of darkness, but because of it. They are no longer defined by what they've endured. They are defined by what they've integrated. And that makes them unstoppable. The aftermath. When the narcissist faces their own reflection. When the empath walks away, the world does not explode. There are no grand endings, no poetic closures, only silence. But for the narcissist, that silence is not peace. It is terror. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists." And few things are resisted more fiercely than the truth of one's own emptiness. The narcissist has spent a lifetime crafting an identity made of mirrors. Every reflection, every admirer's heartbreak serving as proof of existence. But when the last empath withdraws their light, those mirrors begin to crack. Suddenly, the narcissist is alone with the one presence they cannot manipulate, their own. And it's not a presence of strength. It's absence. An echo chamber of unprocessed shame, unmet love, and unbearable self-loathing. At first, they scramble. They'll try to replace the empath immediately. Anyone will do, as long as they can project the illusion again. They'll post pictures, flaunt new connections, chase validation as if it can refill the void. But no matter how fast they move, the hollowness follows. Because the narcissist's tragedy is not that they lost love. It's that they never knew how to receive it in the first place. They've only ever known control. And control, as Jung understood, is the ego's desperate attempt to hide from the unconscious. When that control fails, the mask slips, and what's revealed beneath is not a monster, but a frightened child. A child who learned that love was performance, that worth was conditional, that being powerful was safer than being vulnerable. This is the dark night of the narcissist's soul, a place they've avoided their entire lives. Without the empath's steady presence to absorb their chaos, they are forced to meet what they've denied, the shadow. The self they've buried under layers of vanity, manipulation, and pride. And make no mistake, the shadow is relentless. It shows them every cruelty, every lie, every hollow victory. It reminds them that their brilliance was built on someone else's exhaustion, that their power was borrowed, that their charm was camouflage. The narcissist begins to sense, maybe for the first time, the enormity of what they've destroyed to feel alive. Jung wrote, "People measure their self by the reflection of what they see in others." For the narcissist, that reflection is now gone. They stare into the mirror and see not beauty, but distortion. Not confidence, but panic. Because mirrors don't love back. They only return what stands before them. And what stands before them now is the unhealed self, the one they've deceived, abandoned, and rejected for years. The irony, of course, is that this confrontation is the only thing that could ever save them. The only way through the darkness is through the truth. But most narcissists will not cross that threshold, not easily. Because the journey demands humility, accountability, and grief, the very emotions they've learned to suppress. So instead, many will cycle back into denial. They'll rewrite the story again. The empath was crazy, ungrateful, too emotional. It's easier to destroy the truth than to sit in its silence. But some, a rare few, will awaken. Because not every narcissist is lost forever. Some are simply broken versions of the empath they once were. And when the mirror finally shatters, the pain of that truth can awaken something deeply human. They begin to ask the questions they've avoided. Why do I fear being unseen? Why do I need control to feel loved? If they have the courage to face those answers, healing becomes possible. But make no mistake, it is a brutal process, one Jung described as holding the tension of the opposites. They must face the grand illusion of their false self and let it die. And while they face that reckoning, the empath, now whole, grounded, and free, watches from a distance. Not with vengeance, not with pity, but with understanding, because they finally see what Jung meant when he said, Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. They understand that the narcissist's cruelty was never power, it was pain unprocessed. They see that every manipulation was a plea for control, every insult a projection of shame. And with that awareness comes release. The empath no longer needs closure, because closure is already within them. For the narcissist, however, the story remains open-ended. Some will keep running from mirror to mirror, collecting new reflections to delay the inevitable. Others will break, finally, painfully, and begin to rebuild something real. But no matter what happens, one truth remains. They will never forget the moment the empath walked away. Because it was the first time they met silence that didn't crumble. The first time someone saw through them, and still chose peace. And in that peace lies the greatest danger of all, the realization that they can no longer draw life from someone else's light. They must now find their own. Jung would call this the confrontation with the self, the death of illusion, and the possibility of rebirth. But only if they have the courage to stay in the silence long enough to hear what their soul has been whispering all along, that love was never control, and control was never love. The empath's final evolution. And so, when the empath finally reaches the other side of pain, they don't seek revenge, they seek peace. They realize that true power was never about controlling others, or proving their worth to someone who could never see it. It was about mastering themselves, their emotions, their reactions, their boundaries. Carl Jung once wrote that, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that's what the fed-up empath ultimately achieves. Through heartbreak, through betrayal, through silent endurance, they have peeled away every illusion until only authenticity remains. They have learned that love without self-respect is submission, that compassion without discernment is destruction, and that forgiveness doesn't mean return, it means release. The narcissist may still talk, still twist, still project, but their power is gone. Because it only ever thrived in the empath's confusion. Now there is none. There is only calm. In that silence, the empath rises, grounded, graceful, and unshakable. They no longer absorb pain, they transform it. They no longer chase validation, they embody it. And that's when they become something the narcissist can never understand, free. If you've ever been that empath, drained, doubted, dismissed, remember this. The very depth they tried to destroy was the source of your rebirth. You were never too sensitive. You were simply too awake. And in a world asleep to its own darkness, that awareness is your greatest power.